I worked seasonal fire watch in the Uinta Mountains back in 2018. Most of my time was spent alone in a tower, monitoring weather systems and relaying smoke reports over radio. But one night in late August, around 2:30 in the morning, I picked up something strange on the ranger band. It wasn't the usual chatter from trail crews or wildfire alerts. It came through on Channel 7, which hasn't been in use for years, since the old Long Pine Ranger Station was decommissioned. That post had been shut down back in the 90s after a rockslide made the access road unstable. No one had been stationed out there since. But I heard it. Faint, staticky, but unmistakable. A voice, male, whispering. At first I thought it was some kind of interference, but then the words cut through the static. "They're in the trees. I can see them." I froze. The voice was weak and hoarse, like someone who hadn't had water in days. I tried to answer, asked for a location, but there was no reply, just more static. A minute later, it came back again. Same voice, a little more frantic this time. "They're not animals. They look like people, but they're not." I wrote down a timestamp and recorded the channel on my laptop. The next morning, I reported it to my supervisor. He didn't seem too concerned. Said it was probably radio skip or interference from another band. But when I asked about Channel 7 specifically, he went quiet and just said, "That station's been closed a long time." Later, I asked another guy I knew who worked the Uintas year-round, and he told me the Long Pine Station had some history. There were a couple of stories, unofficial ones, about strange things seen near it. A fire crew once claimed they saw a man standing in a tree about 40 feet up, not moving, just crouched there. Another ranger apparently found a bunch of deer standing totally still in the road at night, all facing the same direction, like they were watching something deep in the woods. Nobody really talks about it on the record, though. I've listened to Channel 7 a few more times over the years, just out of curiosity. Usually there's nothing, just static. But one time in 2020, I picked up something again. Heavy breathing, no words. I think about driving out there and trying to find that old station. But I don't. Because if someone really was transmitting from Long Pine that night, there's no reason they should have been alive. I've been elk hunting in the Uinta Mountains since I was old enough to carry a rifle. I know the ridges and trails better than I know the streets in my own neighborhood. So I'm not someone who gets turned around easily or spooked by strange noises in the woods. But what I saw out there that day didn't feel like it belonged in this world. That elk season had been slow. My buddy James bailed on the trip last minute, so I went solo. I hiked in about 8 miles from the Mirror Lake Highway side, off a side trail I won't name, because I still go out there sometimes. It's remote, the kind of place where you don't see another soul for days. After setting up camp near a creek, I hiked up to a high ridge to glass some meadows below. Around 2 p.m., I spotted a bull moving through the trees a few ridgelines west. I started working my way toward it quietly, sticking to cover. The terrain got steeper and rockier. I crested one last hill, thinking I'd cut it off, and that's when I saw it. Something was half buried in the dirt, tucked between some deadfall and moss-covered rocks. At first, I thought it was just another elk skull, or maybe a cow or mule that had wandered off and died. But when I got closer, my stomach dropped. It was a skull, but not from anything I recognized. It was huge, way bigger than any human skull should have been. The cranium was long and slightly ridged, with a jaw that extended farther than ours. But what messed me up most were the teeth. There were 2 full rows, upper and lower. Not like shark teeth either. These were human-shaped molars and incisors, just stacked, one behind the other. Two perfect lines of teeth. It looked old, weathered, but not fossilized, like it hadn't been there more than a few years. I remember standing there for a long time, just staring at it. It gave off this wrong feeling, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's the only way I can describe it. The woods went totally silent, like something was watching me. I pulled out my phone to take a photo, but the camera just froze, wouldn't even open. So I picked up a stick and tried to lift the jaw a bit to get a better look. When I did, it made this hollow clack noise, and something shifted under the leaves behind it. I turned fast, nothing there, but it felt like something had just ducked out of sight. I marked the GPS coordinates on my Garmin, snapped a mental photo, and hiked back to camp before dark. That night, I kept hearing noises outside, heavy footsteps. The next morning, I packed up and hiked out early. As soon as I got signal near the highway, I called the Summit County Sheriff's Office and told them I'd found what might be human remains. 2 days later, I went back out there with a deputy and a wildlife officer, but when we got to the spot, the skull was gone. The leaves and rocks looked disturbed, like someone had swept the area clean. Even the moss on the logs had been scraped off in places. The ranger looked annoyed. I could tell he thought I was wasting their time. I kept saying, "I swear it was right here. I marked it on the GPS. I saw it with my own eyes." That's when the wildlife officer said something that stuck with me ever since. "You're not the first hunter to report strange remains up here, and they never stick around long. Nature cleans up fast, or something else does." When I told James about it later, he just said, "You really need to stop going into those mountains alone." I still think about that skull. The way it vanished, the teeth, the silence, the footsteps. I don't know what's out there in the Uintas. I really don't. But I know what I saw, and whatever it is, it doesn't want to be found. I've done solo hikes all over the western US, but for the last few years, the Uinta Mountains in Utah have kind of become my go-to. They're huge, remote, and honestly pretty underrated. I don't usually run into many people when I'm out there, which is exactly how I like it. This happened in August of 2021. I was out on a 4-day backpacking trip starting near the Highline Trailhead, just east of Mirror Lake. My plan was to bushwhack out to a couple unnamed lakes I'd marked on my map, places I was pretty sure most people don't even know exist. I was about 10 miles in on day 2 when I ran into this ranger. He stepped out from the trees maybe 50 yards ahead of me on the trail. Tall guy, clean uniform, forest green pants and button-up with patches on both sleeves, tan campaign hat. Nothing about him seemed weird at first, other than how suddenly he appeared. He raised a hand and said, "Hey there." I stopped and nodded back. "Hey, didn't think I'd see anyone out this far." He smiled. "You're the only one I've seen in a couple days. You camping solo?" I said, "Yeah, just me." He got real serious then. Walked a little closer and lowered his voice. "I don't want to alarm you, but there's been a couple disappearances reported in this area over the last week. Couple hikers didn't show up when they were supposed to. Friends called them in missing. We've been searching the surrounding trails, checking in on folks." That immediately set off red flags in my head. I hadn't heard anything about missing hikers when I was researching this trip, and I'd checked alerts on the Forest Service site the night before I left. But I didn't want to seem paranoid or confrontational. I asked him, "Did they go missing near here?" He nodded slowly. "Right around this basin. We've been advising people not to camp overnight past the next ridge." That bothered me. There hadn't been any signs posted, no warnings, nothing. and I'd already passed that ridge. I mentioned that, and he just kind of shrugged. We've kept it low profile, don't want to cause panic. He looked me over for a second, then added, "If I were you, I'd make camp closer to the trail junction back west. It's safer there." He gave me a long look, again, not creepy, just weirdly flat, like he was waiting for something. Then he turned and started walking back into the trees in the direction he'd come from and disappeared between the trees. Something about that conversation stuck with me. I've talked to real rangers before, and they're usually super by the book. This guy felt off, too quiet, too vague. Later that afternoon, I pulled out my Garmin and tried messaging my buddy who works for the Forest Service. He wasn't stationed in Utah, but he knows people who are. I asked him if there had been any recent disappearances near Mirror Lake, or if they'd stationed extra rangers in the area. He didn't reply right away, no signal, but I figured I'd get something later. That night, I made camp near a rocky ledge above a creek, further out than I probably should have gone if that guy was telling the truth. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't. I felt like if I followed his advice, I'd be doing exactly what he wanted. I didn't sleep much. There were noises in the trees, branches snapping, heavy footfalls, but nothing ever came close. I packed up early the next morning and started hiking back toward the main trail. That's when my Garmin buzzed. It was a message from my friend. All it said was, "No disappearances reported. FS confirms no active patrols in that area right now. You said a ranger?" I stopped walking, just stood there for a second. Yeah, I said a ranger. Now I was seriously freaked out. I was about 9 miles from the trailhead with 2 more nights planned, but I turned around and started hiking out. No more exploring, no more off-trail detours, just straight back the way I came. About 2 hours later, I stopped to take a break near a small alpine meadow. That's when I noticed something strange. There were boot prints in the dirt off to the side of the trail. Big ones, the same tread pattern I remembered seeing on the supposed ranger's boots. But they weren't heading away from the trail. They were coming toward it from deep in the woods, and then just ended. No turning around, no sign of a camp, just 5 or 6 prints appearing from the woods and stopping at the trail's edge. I hiked the rest of the way out in one shot, reached my car by nightfall, and drove straight into Kamas. I called the ranger district the next morning and asked if they had any personnel in that area on August 14th. I gave a rough description of the guy I'd seen. They told me very plainly, "No, sir. We haven't had anyone assigned to that section in over a week. No one matches that description." I didn't know what to say. I asked if it could have been someone from a different agency, search and rescue, maybe. "No SR deployments out there either," the woman said. "If you saw someone dressed like a ranger, they weren't with us." To this day, I don't know who or what I saw in those woods, but someone, or something, was wearing a Forest Service uniform, and giving advice meant to isolate me, and it knew exactly where I'd be. I've gone back to the Uinta since then, but never alone, and I stay far away from that side of the range now, because whoever that man was, he wasn't trying to help me. He was trying to lead me somewhere, and I don't think I would have come back.